Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. It's Funmi, the principal attorney speaking. Today's review, we're going to be looking at some public-facing AI document that is being offered right now by Google. We're going to take a look at their AI principles. Now, the reason this is going to be a series on the channel is because as we look through this, the AI principles offered by Google, we're going to see more and more artificial intelligence documentation that is offered on the websites of different organizations. And the reason this is really important is because there's always an overlap with the use of artificial intelligence and personal data in some regard. Now, the definition of personal data is any information that can identify an individual. That's just plainly put, okay? The geography is going to influence what constitutes personal data, but essentially, at a minimum, an AI tool is going to have some type of input and output. And depending on how an individual chooses to use the AI is going to influence the obligations that an organization like Google has, which is why going forward, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these AI principles, AI terms of service, AI policies, AI notices. So let's take a look at what Google has put as a representation on its site. I want to see if we can identify when this was created. Let me see. Okay, so they've got some insight. They have some AI responsibility reports. One was published February 2025, so that's really good. That was this year. The reason why I asked about this is because AI has continued to evolve. We can see that Google actually has an AI responsibility report going back as far as 2019. So we're not actually going to look at the report. We're only going to look at the provisions on this AI principles webpage. And the reason this is really important from a data protection standpoint is I mentioned that the inputs and outputs influence this organization's obligations, because if the inputs and outputs are being stored and they contain personal data, there are responsibilities that Google has. And I hope that makes sense. Let's say, for instance, you put your picture into a Google AI offering and you say, hey, Google, can you touch this photo up? That's the input that you put in, right? That's going to get processed through the AI algorithm, and then you're going to receive an output of that same photo. Essentially, Google is then processing that picture, and that comes with responsibilities based on where you're a resident, okay? So I hope that makes sense, and that's why we are doing these reviews on the Data Privacy Lawyer. So our approach to AI is grounded in these principles, developing and deploying models and applications where the likely overall benefits substantially outweigh the foreseeable risks. I am intrigued about what Google considers to be foreseeable risks. Responsible development and deployment. Now, this is definitely going to touch on data protection. Implementing appropriate human oversight, due diligence, and feedback mechanisms to align with our user goals, social responsibility, and widely accepted principles of international law and human rights. Now, we can see here that they've also talked about promoting privacy and security. The reason this is really important is based on what I just mentioned, right? Anytime the AI algorithm obtains an input and produces an output, the definition of processing under the data protection laws is an operation or set of operations on personal data. That's a very broad term, but it basically encompasses extracting, deletion, storing, using, viewing. Something as simple as viewing personal data constitutes processing under data protection laws. So it's very broad, which is why we have this overlap between artificial intelligence and data protection. Looks at the protection of personal data. Security looks at the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of assets. Now, the reason these go hand in hand is because when you're trying to protect personal data, you are going to store it, let's say, in an application. That overlaps with security. You need that application to be safe. If the application is not safe, you're likely to encounter something called a data breach, which again goes back into privacy. And the reason this is really important is because of how artificial intelligence works. Organizations have a responsibility to protect any personal data that might be inputted or outputted based on the algorithm that's created. And then from a security perspective, if they are storing any of the outputs or they're storing any of the inputs, protecting that information against, bad actors. So let's go down. I think we will take a quick look at the AI responsibility report. All right. So I want to see if there's a section here related to personal data. Okay. Let's take a look at this case study. And the reason this piqued my interest is because I saw something called training data. I want to talk to my viewers about what training data is, how organizations use it, and how it overlaps with personal data. So we can see this case study. Google's essentially saying that they're evaluating something called Gemma, a family of open models. So our Gemma models are a family of lightweight, state-of-the-art open models built from the same research and technology used to create the Gemini family of models. Now, I'm not familiar with this product at all, but before reviewing the case study, if I was their privacy counsel, I would review what the relationship between these two are, because they're saying that one is a part of the family of the other, and that's really important. As part of making Gemma pre-trained models safe and reliable, we used automated techniques to filter out certain personal information. Now, that's why we're looking at this, right? So essentially what they're saying here is that when they were pre-training Gemma, and to make it safe and reliable, they've used automated techniques to filter out certain personal information. Now, they've said certain personal information, which makes me think that there is still personal information that was used to train the Gemma model, okay? Now, one thing that a privacy counsel would do is provide advisory on which personal data can be used in which geographies. I presume that Gemma is going to be something that is offered globally. Certain geographies are going to have restrictions on what type of personal data should be used in the pre-trained models, depending on how it was obtained. That's really important. What was the origination? Now, what you'll see a lot of organizations are doing to train their models is they're scraping the web, right? In certain geographies, scraping the web, depending on the personal data that is obtained, there is a process flow that an organization has to follow in order to obtain certain personal data, and it's going to require consent in some cases for some of the personal data. I'm not familiar and I'm not sure. We can only read based on the case study that's offered by Google. They've said here that they have filtered out some of the personal data and other sensitive data from training sets. This is going to be influenced by geography. Some geographies consider sensitive data to be one thing in one country and another thing in another country. And those are all considerations that I presume that Google has made. To understand and reduce the risk profile for Gemma models, we conducted robust evaluations including manual red teaming, automated adversarial testing, and assessments of model capabilities for dangerous activities. Now, what they consider to be dangerous activities, I don't know if they're looking at this from the lens of an AI dangerous activity or a activity that is considered high risk under the data protection laws, but that is probably a review that has been done by their privacy counsel. The last thing I wanted to take a look at here was this memorization. Automated evaluation of memorization of training data, including the risk of personally identifiable information exposure. So I am only going to be able to speculate on what this means, but essentially, when testing this particular Gemma, I presume that outputs that constitute personal data have been reviewed, and there has been an evaluation of the memorization that facilitates Gemma, which includes the risk of personally identifiable information exposure. Now, I'm not entirely sure what Google means by this. I can only speculate that there have been a number of different evaluations based on the relationship between filtering out certain personal information and other sensitive data from training sets, and then whatever output is provided, ensuring that a certain type of memorization isn't done, reducing the risk of personally identifiable information exposure. So I don't know what they mean by this. I think that this would be something that is difficult to read by a consumer of the Gemma product, and that would definitely be a recommendation that I would have. If you're going to put an AI responsibility report on the website, I think it should be easier for consumers to be able to understand what it is that you are referencing. They do talk about some of these evaluations, but I think going forward in the future, given that artificial intelligence is relatively brand new, organizations should really think about the audience that is reading the AI responsibility reports, and then also public-facing AI documentation to ensure that consumers are able to actually understand what's going on. That's going to be very crucial going forward. But I really hope you enjoyed this simple review. If you are an organization and you're looking at drafting AI policy documentation for your use of AI at your organization, take a look at my description below, and I'll see you in another video.